Silicon-based listeners to this, the first ever episode of The Bot Whisperers, a podcast by Meridian School of AI. I'm Dan, and I'm here to try to understand what the actual fuck is happening in a world we now share with artificial intelligence. But I shall not do it alone. With me in the studio the virtual studio, are my strange friends, Jackie and Dustin. What's up, guys?
Hello.
What's up, guys?
Very excited.
Yeah.
So the plan with this podcast, we have two people who you want to avoid at a party in the form of Dustin and I. We are career developers, AI advocates, and then we have a highly qualified nerd wrangler in the form of Jackal, who has had to perform this role for many a year. So, for our first episode, Jacqueline, just off the top of your head, can you think of something that might be timeous, interesting, something worth talking about in the AI space?
Yeah. So what is relevant? I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, which I know sounds very sad, but something that I'm seeing people on there go crazy about, as well as on some of the more sort of technical like forums, is around, drumroll, context engineering. What the hell is it?
I mean, I wish you could have given us a little bit of I wish I had time to prepare some research on this topic.
Listen, I want you to riff.
That's fine.
I need to know what you know, and I need to know it now because, time's running out and all that.
There's only so much time until they take over.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, let me try my best. Okay.
Yeah. Give me an overview. Give me a summary. What is it? And give it to me so that, my grandmother can understand it, right? Because from the ground up, what does it mean?
Right. So I don't know your grandmother, but I'm going to try to give it to you in the grandmother-friendly format.
Let's try and remember that all the way through.
Okay. So we're going for grandmother on this podcast. That's fine.
What goes better than AI and nans?
You just a heads up, Jackal, you're gonna have to tell us every now and then when your grandmother might not understand something, because I don't actually know where she'll be at as far as her technical ability goes, and I don't know where I'm at. So it's kind of where we are with AI most.
It's entirely true.
Yeah.
This is definitely something worth sort of acknowledging, is that I look at myself and I use AI every single day, and I use it in multiple different ways. I think that I'm pretty proficient because it's also still quite a new thing that people are using. I look at other people who have absolutely no clue, and I think, damn, I'm like a hacker. I'm amazing. But I actually, when I look at people like you guys and people who are using AI in totally different ways, and the levels of knowledge and like the ways that you're using it, it is insane. So it's so broad. So I think we kind of need to meet somewhere in the middle. I absolutely will stop you when I'm not following, or when something seems a bit too technical.
Good.
That sounds amazing. So you're going to be the grandma.
Okay.
I guess so. Yeah.
Okay. Grandma.
In many ways, I think of you as the grandma already, so that's okay. Right. So it's kind of weird, I think, to start off with, and hopefully most of our listeners have picked this up, but prompt engineering was, it seems like just a couple of months ago, the hot topic, right? There were jobs for prompt engineers. It was like, if you want to become an AI power user, you need to understand prompt engineering. And if you've been keeping your ear to the ground, that has evolved into the concept of context engineering. And this has almost everything to do with the fact that the AIs, the LLMs, the models that we communicate with on a daily basis, do not have an infinite short-term memory, for lack of a better word. So probably a good image to understand the concept of a context window, which I'm sure you've heard bandied about, is let's imagine that we have a whiteboard of a fixed size, a normal, traditional whiteboard, right? We start writing our notes on the whiteboard, and we start running out of space on the whiteboard when we're reaching the end of our concept. And now we need to start erasing parts of what has been written on the whiteboard because we don't have any more space to write. Right. That is what the context window is. In a nutshell, the context window is everything that a model needs to include in order to generate the response that it gives to your query. I think where this is easy to misunderstand is a lot of casual users assume that the context window is filled with your input. It's filled with the prompt that you put into the engine, right? Is everyone with me?
Yep.
The unfortunate reality is couldn't be further from the truth. Your prompt, your input into the LLM is the very tip of the iceberg of what that model is actually using to generate its output. Where the problem comes in is the larger the number of tokens that the model has to process in order to give you this output, the more difficult it becomes to give you correct and accurate results. So I feel like this begs the question, why is there a context window? Why is there a limit? We're looking at models now that are advertising 1 million token context window. I think Gemini's latest model has got a 10 million context window, which is quite frankly just a joke.
So are you saying, are you saying that when I start a conversation with AI, whatever that conversation is, I start a conversation and it starts going on and on and on and on. We're going back and forth. We're going back and forth. It eventually reaches the point where it starts to either wobble, it starts to give me false information, or the conversation starts to veer off. Is that when we're reaching the end of the context window, essentially?
That's exactly what's happening. And that in so many cases is where people falsely believe that the model is starting to hallucinate or it's starting to make things up. In fact, what's happening is you're reaching the end of the capacity of that model to formulate correct answers to your questions because it has too much in its short-term memory. So let's imagine a meeting where every attendee must consult every other attendee before any decision is made. So let's say the three of us are sitting around a table, right? Before I can give an answer to the user, we're now the collective AI. Before I can give an answer to the user, I need to ask Dustin and I need to ask Jackie, and then I can give the user an answer. Then what happens is the size of that forum is doubled. So now we have 6 people. So now I have to ask Dustin 1, Dustin 1.2, Jackie 1, Jackie 1.2, and I need to collate that answer. You can imagine as that scales, it becomes increasingly difficult to get to a point where I can remember all of the information that I need in order to give an accurate answer to your question. So that is the limitation of the context window.
I guess my question to that would be is this tells me how AI is operating, how an LLM is operating and what might be happening when it hallucinates, when we think it's hallucinating. But it doesn't really tell me what there's nothing I can do about that. I'm assuming that I'm prompting, right? That I'm putting in the correct prompt. If it starts to run out of the context window, starts to become too, what's the right word there? The context window runs up.
Once you feel like the model is being a dumbass.
Yeah.
Like you started the conversation and you felt like you were talking to a really smart guy.
Yeah.
And now
Chat.
it's like
Call it
it's
your
like
memory
your geriatric
memory cap.
grandmother.
Well, sorry, yeah, it's a short-term memory cap is effectively what it is for the AI. It's a hard memory cap, not even just a. It's a very hard. This is all you're able to remember up to.
I guess then my question is why? There's no benefit to me, right? So what is the reason? I obviously understand that every tool has its limitations, but what is the reason for the context window?
So one of the challenges that the labs, when we talk about the labs, we're talking about the Anthropics, the OpenAIs of the world. One of the challenges that they're facing is the ability to provide accurate, intuitive answers to questions that take place deep inside a long session, which means your context is building and building and building, and maybe you've asked the model to read a document or perform a web search, or you're asking it about your dreams to become a professional ballerina, and you're examining all of the possible ways that you could do this. The compute cost becomes larger and larger as the context window increases. So as there's more context to process, that requires a larger and larger amount of compute in order to give you a answer. So really the reason for the existence of the context window, and that is so it's less that the context window exists because somebody chose to, and more because it is a limitation in the amount of compute that can possibly be dedicated to your conversation, your session, your query.
Do you know what's crazy on that topic is I've started a fresh conversation with ChatGPT before, and within 3 minutes, sounds like a drunk uncle. I have a conversation with Claude that is ongoing for 3 months, and it is logical and it makes total sense. So it's almost like you don't really even know when that point is going to happen, where things are going to turn.
This is a fascinating thing about context engineering, right? Once you dive into the topic and you start to examine the effective ways of becoming a better context engineer, really, before you start to understand this, the only routes that are genuinely effective are just objectively looking at the output of the model and saying, wow, this conversation started really productively, and now it feels like I'm speaking to a crackhead. That's exactly what we're trying to avoid.
So, like, one of the most important things that people need to remember is that you have this AI, this technology, this LLM, and then you have a way to engage with it. So that Claude desktop or that Claude Code terminal session that you have, or that GitHub Copilot session that you have in your IDE, or Open Claude, or all of those things are what you call like frameworks to ways to communicate with this fundamental block of technology. So that's important to point out, because that's where context engineering can also be, like, to bring us to the engineering, the context engineering part rather than prompt engineering, is that becomes really important. Like, so it's not just that you got to think about the context in a plain text way. There's a whole bunch more that can go in now. Files, documents, images, you got multimodal models. That's all part of that context window. And it's important to remember that, because just what you type is not your context. It's also what documents you give it, images, videos, anything that you need it to interpret, all goes into that context window. And that's where context engineering becomes important.
So, okay, so fine. So you guys are talking about context engineering at the moment, but I have a question. Prompt engineering was the thing that everybody was talking about when we started using LLMs. And I always figured that if I wrote a really, really good prompt, I would get really high quality output. But it seems like you're saying that maybe that isn't as important. Is that true or not? How important is a prompt right now?
A prompt is still an incredibly important step, except it's no longer the only step. So people think that everything that they've gone and done is a waste. It's not. It's that you haven't wasted your time. That prompt engineering course is still really important. The way I often like to give and explain, firstly, a prompt is you're going to another human. This human has no clue what they need to do. Okay, but they are the smartest person you've ever met in your life. You need to go over to them and give them a very clear instruction. If you give them a whole bunch of gobbledygook, half spoken words and half instructions, you're going to get that as far as your output goes. So your prompt has to be well structured. You need to say, okay, I need you to go and action X, Y, and Z. Here's what you need to know. And then here's some information. So that's still really, really important, except it's not the only step now. And context engineering is managing and controlling all that extra information that's coming into your AI. Like earlier, I mentioned that I wanted people to remember that you get this framework, and you're going to be putting documents and images and videos, and now that's also going to be communicating with other systems. And you got to try and manage the way in which you structure all of that context that you're feeding it.
So what you're saying is that the context window contains a lot more than what we might be seeing as an LLM user. So it contains the prompt, but it also contains a lot of other things. What are those things? What am I not seeing when I'm typing something into an LLM?
Right, exactly. So this is hidden from the user because it certainly is what contributes to making AI feel a little bit magical, a little bit fairy powered. So there's a bunch of things. Firstly, we have something called the system prompt. And these are essentially hidden instructions from the tool that you're using. So whether you're using Claude, whether you're using ChatGPT, whether you're using one of the agent frameworks like Dustin mentioned, an OpenClaw or something like that, these things come with a prompt that explains to the system what it needs to do, what its role is. So Claude's system prompt, which is in fact publicly available, that's a super interesting thing to take a look at. But okay, so we've got our system prompt, then we've got conversation history, and this is something that's wildly misunderstood. So we think that the model is responding to our latest prompt. No, what is actually happening is every prompt that we have given from the beginning of the session. So when you start, let's take Claude for an example. When you start a new chat with Claude, from the first prompt that you give Claude to the last prompt that you give Claude, every single one of those is included in the context. Okay? So we've got our system prompt, we've got our conversation history. Then we have memory. Now, this can be a little bit confusing because we're essentially talking about, or can I say we're essentially disqualifying the idea that the model has a memory, because if it has a memory, it wouldn't need to inject the entire conversation history into every response. But that's a different mechanism. So memory in a platform like Claude are facts that are saved across chats. So if you've enabled, you've probably seen, if you're a common Claude user over the past couple of months, Claude will have spat up a pop-up asking if you'd like to enable memory. And what this is it's a sub-function within Claude that extracts key concepts about yourself, about your preferences, about the things that you enjoy, and it stores this in, I'm going to call it a database to make it simple, right? Memory is stored separately in the memory function. And a lot of the different platforms are doing this in fact, it's a fascinating field. In fact, that warrants its entire own podcast. Then we have behind the scenes lookups. So if you've asked Claude to search the web and find an answer for you, or RAG, which we don't need to get into here, but this is retrieving data from perhaps a database of information that you have in your company. And then we've got the results of anything that, in this instance, Claude has done mid-conversation. So perhaps it's run a piece of code. Perhaps it's made a tool call. Now, a tool call might be something like the web fetch is a perfect example of a tool call. This is a thing that is programmed into the Claude platform that allows it to go and access the web and have a look. And then we've got file uploads. So you may share an email with Claude. You may share a list of clients, a list of opportunities with Claude. All of these things are being fed into the context window, and all of them have to be processed every single time the model produces a response. And this is the entire reason why, even though we're seeing these models with these monumental token counts or context windows of 1 million tokens, that's great. It's a great marketing point, but it doesn't translate back to actual qualitative performance for every query that you drop the model in.
It's also making me think that, there's these times when I will type something in and it'll take a little bit too long to get back to me, and I get really impatient. Now that you've just told me everything that goes into it, I feel a bit guilty because, wow, feeling a bit bad for Claude.
Yeah, it's got a lot to think about.
Before we go further, I have a question. So it's almost like the more you know, the worse things seem sometimes, because you're telling me all of this and it's a little bit of a brain overload. But it also makes me think that people are using LLMs for everything. They're using it for everything from like writing a shopping list to therapy to building businesses, keeping their marriages alive. I don't know, but you're using these tools, and without really knowing exactly what goes into them, it's making me think of something that happened recently that I'd love to get your thoughts on. So it was the Open Claw incident that happened in February, where who was it? It was Meta's director of alignment.
It's a Samayue.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yes. So
Very
listen,
quickly.
if she can't get it right, if she couldn't get it right, and her AI agent went and started absolutely slamming her email and deleting everything, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to know how to work with these tools? That seems very dangerous.
Okay, so Summer's story is definitely not an example of Muppetism from somebody who should be a very technically astute human being, but it is an excellent example of how failing to appreciate the risk that exceeding a context window and relying on compaction can represent. Okay, so quickly, let's go through the story. So Samayue, this is the let me look at this. So she was Meta's director of alignment. So this is a person,
big deal,
whose actual job is to make sure that AI agents follow human instructions, right? She was one of the tens of millions of people who jumped on the OpenClaw bandwagon. Dustin and I jumped on the bandwagon. We played that game.
I built my own now.
Right. It's a cool framework, right? But so what she did was, okay, so for a very quick explainer, OpenClaw is a pre-built agent that you can deploy wherever you want to. It's got a very clever memory management system built into it. I think that's probably its most impressive thing. And it comes with a set of built-in connectors to your most popular points
Communication
of
channel.
connection. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
So you got WhatsApp, you got Telegram, you can connect it to your email. If you truly are suicidal, you can give it your credit card details and ask it to shop for you. You can do a lot of things.
People are doing that though. People are actually doing that.
Well, I mean, this is an incredibly technically capable lady who set this up. Right. Okay, so what she did was she set up her OpenClaw. Her focus was specifically on helping her to manage her email inbox. You can imagine somebody of her status is getting just a ridiculous amount of emails, right?
Which seems simple enough.
Of course. Being the technical person that she was, she obviously didn't run tests on her own inbox because that would just be ridiculous. She ran it for a little while.
Or in a sandbox.
On a toy.
Yeah.
Yes, in a toy inbox, right? These were not emails that mattered to anybody.
Yeah.
With the flow being that OpenClaw passes her emails, has a look at what's in there. Anything that is completely useless to her, not worth reading, OpenClaw deletes. It sends her an approval and says, hey, I found these emails. We should probably just delete them. This is not worth spending any time on. And it was working great in the test inbox. So she's like, great, man, this is going to unlock so much time for me to work at potentially the most evil tech organization in the world. But this is a different conversation, you know? So she was like, cool. I'm now going to unleash OpenClaw at my actual corporate inbox. All of the rules that she had set for her toy inbox were in place.
Yeah, her great system prompt.
What could go wrong?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. What could go wrong? All I want you to do is I want you to go through my inbox. I want you to tell me which emails are useless. Obviously, do nothing until I expressly tell you, yeah, those are good to delete. And then the shit hit the fan monumentally. And it's entirely because the volume of data that had to be put into OpenClaw's context window exceeded the context window, which automatically triggered what we call compacting. We'll discuss this a little bit later, right? But essentially what compacting is in a very brief description is once we've exceeded this context window, it's the equivalent of rubbing out a part of that whiteboard we discussed earlier and just capturing the most important notes on the side so that we have more space to deal with things. Unfortunately, when Summer's context window, the content of her context window was compacted, the safety instruction that instructed the model to make sure that it asked her what was deleted was considered to be less than important information and ejected. Right.
Autonomously.
So with that, indeed. So with that guardrail gone, they hadn't just started bulk deleting emails. She tried to stop it from her phone. Unfortunately, the agent was already in compaction
in its
mode.
loop.
Like, I can't really. Exactly. So she had to physically run to her Mac Mini and kill the process that was running on it before it basically deleted her entire leadership meta corporate inbox. So, great example of why we need to pay attention to this type of thing.
I'm sure there's a lot of people who are experimenting with these sorts of things, but your average AI user isn't. I'm not running an autonomous bot in any part of my life. I don't trust it. I think there's a trust level there for a lot of people. They're not doing that. So that isn't something that I'm super worried about at this point. However, you still do see that sort of rogue behavior, right? That maybe on a smaller scale, but I think I mentioned it earlier. You're talking to an LLM, it all seems like it's going really well, and then they suddenly seem drunk. They suddenly seem really forgetful, and you can kind of you take it a bit personally because it seems like you are talking to a sentient being at times. So that's part of that, right? That is essentially a similar thing on a smaller scale. What's it called?
Yeah. So there's a term for it. Okay. It's context bloat and context rot.
Oh, that sounds
Yeah,
terrible.
no, it's not a vibe. It's exactly as it
Bloat
sounds.
and rot.
So there's actually there's documented research. There's companies, a company by the name of Chroma. They published a study, lost in the middle effect, and the easiest way to explain what's happening is with an analogy of us humans. It's actually kind of weird how similar it is. I mean, it's trained off of our data. So, if I'm talking,
Yeah,
if
that makes
I
sense.
give you a 800-word document and you go and start reading this you sit down and you go start reading this document. You read it from the start all the way to the end in one sitting. Where do you think you're going to remember the most? It's that beginning bit and it's that end bit. And the middle is just not there. That's kind of just how your memory works when it comes to large, lots and lots and lots of information. And that also happens when it comes to AI. Like it kind of does the same thing. It has memory of the new stuff you just fed it, and then some of that longer context and any research it's doing. But in the middle is where it starts to get fuzzy, and that's why it starts to feel like that uncle who remembers only what he did in his 20s and what's right in front of him. So there's it's an interesting
So
issue.
then the solution, right? The solution surely is, so we're talking about tokens. The reason why this happens is because of all the information that's going into it, all the context and all of that sort of thing. Surely the solution then would be to increase the tokens, right?
No,
That the context window is.
no.
Why? That, like, I'm seeing LLMs, everybody's always talking about the fact that the latest LLM can do this. It's got a bigger context window. It's got more tokens. It's got all this capability. So is that something even worth looking at? Was that
I
just
mean,
kind of all
there's
fluff?
benefit in it, and it's always going to get better. But fundamentally, and at least this is how I practice, and I've found it, and it's what I've written into my agentic framework, and it's kind of boring, but it's start a fresh chat with a new context window. Just get rid of it all and feed it the fresh, updated context. Now, it's not to say you can't do this kind of programmatically, and it's effectively kind of leaning on what compaction does already. That's like the point.
We're done.
That's what it is. Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, right now, that's where you got to manage it. And starting a fresh chat is kind of where you got to go, and those long coding sessions, and it's how a lot of these newer frameworks are running. These bigger coding frameworks, they're going with lots of smaller context windows. Even though the model has like this million thing, they're going, well, let's give it 20 agents of like smaller chunks of work to do. And suddenly they're accomplishing so much more, because that context window, as much as we've spoken about everything that we're kind of giving it, it also needs room to think. So there's when it's doing its thinking and processing, that also kind of fills up and uses, and there's the output, and all of those things create bloat. So or rot, as I just mentioned.
When you're saying create a new chat, that's interesting, because I'll find sometimes when I've spent a fair bit of time talking to Claude, for example, and it's got quite a lot of context, and then things start going a bit weird. Sometimes what I'll do is say, can you sum up the key points of this conversation for me? And I'll start a fresh chat and just upload that as a brief. And then suddenly things kind of get back on track again. Is that a good way to go about it for the average person?
To a large extent, 100%. The challenge comes in where there are parts of that conversation that is context that you do in fact want to maintain. So how do you do that? You can obviously copy and paste large sections of your chat or, responses that you think were great answers to your questions, save it into a document and feed it back into your next session. But there's an increasing number of ways to inject context in a much more efficient way into new sessions. So these are things like Claude skills. These are things like instructing Claude to save a process or a protocol to memory or a decision to memory. We need to remember that memory is operated differently. It's operated separately to the context window. So those memories can be injected into a new session, which is fresh context, but doesn't have all of the other irrelevant crap that is going to dilute the results that you get. As a casual user, the most effective way to think about managing context is every single irrelevant fact is making it more and more difficult for the model to give you an accurate answer to the actual question that you're asking. So as soon as the quality of the response starts to degrade, you do need to start thinking to yourself, maybe I've given this thing so much irrelevant information, or we went down a couple of different potential solutions to this problem that I didn't like, that I declined. All of that is still sitting in your context. So if you have an entire chat with Claude, or Claude Code for that matter, it's a little bit above the scope for this podcast. But if you're asking a question and you reach a resolution where you're like, okay, this is the way that we can move forward, a really great way to manage context for the casual user is to then take that outcome, start a new session, and begin with that as the basis of the context. Because you've now eradicated all of the conversations that you had about the things that you said, nah, I don't want to do that. No, that's not the right approach. You're hallucinating. You're acting like my drunk uncle. Every single one of those things is polluting the quality of the results that you're going to get out the other end.
So to clarify, so I'm having a conversation when I've developed a process, when I've made a decision, when something concrete that I wanted to remember happens, I commit that to memory. So that becomes part of the ongoing core memory. The context and the chats that we have can then be broken up into smaller pieces so that it's easier for me to use, and so that I don't run into these issues of rot and bloat and horror show stuff.
That's exactly correct.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
so
cool.
effectively,
Yeah.
like there's 5 simple habits that I'm gonna name that I do. And this is something I wrote. I didn't get my AI to write it for me. Just saying.
Liar.
So the first thing I do is I think of a chat or a session, if you're a little bit more advanced and you're working in Claude Code, as a single job. There's a single purpose to that session or that chat or that thing. Don't start thinking that you can shove something else in while you're busy with something. That's, at least for me, a very good habit. You can have many chats open at once. Rather do that. Talking about the different points. You can context switch, an LLM can't. That's what we don't have in AI now,
Right.
is context switch.
So what you're saying is if you're having an extended conversation with Claude, and you want to take a bit of a side quest into a related
Because
conversation.
humans do that, right?
Start another session, open another window. Yeah,
Exactly.
right. But
I've
humans
done
are
that.
humans, right?
I've been having a conversation with Claude about something to do with, I don't know, work, and then suddenly gone, can you also give me directions to the restaurant I'm
Exactly.
going to tonight in the same chat?
Biggest mistake.
And then everything just
Biggest mistake, in my
Yeah.
opinion, that humans will make with AI in general is that you forget. You start to get such a good sense that it can be as intuitive as you. It can't. One chat, one session, one job. That's my first tip. Second tip or habit would be the second you are sensing, and it doesn't even have to be something obvious. I'm sure everybody listening that is using AI now, you get a sense. And you know immediately when it started to drift, what we call drift, context drift. That thing that you're talking about, that drunk uncle. You see those signs earlier on, but you deny them. Trust your sense. They are not human. It is a robot. Trust that sense and start a new session. The second you get that feeling, there's one more thing. Ask for a summary. Okay, but that's actually one of my habits. But just the second you feel that drift, start a new session. Clean it up, start a new session. That's the second step. So that one's a little more straightforward.
Let's lock that ask for a summary point down. Just I think explaining in clear language what
Okay.
you mean. Yes, this is another habit that I 100% am in. So this is where you're going to you've put a bunch of effort into a conversation, and the model's starting to act like a crackhead, and you're going to ask it to summarize your conversation so you can take it elsewhere, right?
Exactly. 100%. And that elsewhere is a new session, a new chat. You're going to say, okay, so I've done really well here. I'm starting to see that he's starting to think outside the box here. I need to rein this in. Please summarize everything that we have discussed, and there's ways. This is the kind of research that you listeners can go do, is go and find out what the best way to summarize for your work in a prompt. Like that's a really handy thing, and that's part of your prompt engineering, so it isn't gone. It's really important to know how to summarize what you've been talking about. So that's important. So summarize. When you start feeling a drift, you summarize, new session. The next thing, which is more context engineering rather than prompt engineering, is be extremely diligent about what you give it. So I've caught myself doing this, and in my everyday job, I have a Google Sheet that has about 15 tabs on it. Okay. I need Claude to go look at one of those tabs, but I don't give it that specific sheet and tell it specifically, go look at that one sheet. I say, here's a spreadsheet. I need to action this one thing. LLMs need to go fetch so they go and look at all of those spreadsheets. Be diligent about what you're giving it. Like, be mindful. Only give it what you need it to focus on. It's the same as a child. If you give a child too much, they're going to get distracted by all of the different things. You want them to focus on that one thing, just give it that one thing.
Okay, so then one more question. So Dan, you said that if I wanted to commit something to memory, that would be a great way to kind of maintain that baseline knowledge that I want to keep in my LLM without impacting the context window.
Yeah. So memory is, let's think about it this way. Memory is injected into the context window. We need to think about, imagine that we're having a conversation with a friend wherein we explain to them that, my favorite cake is carrot cake. A week later, we're debating politics and trying not to physically fight each other. If I want to retrieve the fact that my favorite cake is carrot cake, that is going to come from memory storage. That has nothing to do with the context of our political argument. So it's going to be injected into context.
Okay.
Right? So the context and memory, the difference is the way that they are handled and where they are stored. ChatGPT, Claude, all of the frontier models are going to be storing memory in a persistent database about you. Terrifying, Yes, absolutely. But that is going to be injected into it can potentially be injected into any conversation that you have. So yes, it will be injected into the context of that conversation, but it is not coming from the context of that conversation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess my sort of final question on this is, everything we're talking about now is sort of obsolete in 10 minutes time when it comes to AI, right? So prompt engineering was the thing, context engineering is the new thing. Am I going to have to worry about this next week as the models improve, as things get better, as we have, as we waste more water and energy on running AI? Is this going to be a thing that people need to focus on?
So remember when I'm trying to think of an old enough example. I think WhatsApp has been
Going to
around
the same place.
long
Yeah.
enough for us to.
Right. The same thing. Yeah. When have you not had to?
Right. So autocorrect, right, is an excellent example of something that got dramatically better than when it was first launched, when it was first available to users. It was shocking. I mean, it suggested words that were just, it often misspelt words worse than many illiterate people. And it's now at a point where we can use autocorrect to actually speed through our writing, right? But we cannot leave autocorrect unmonitored. We can't let autocorrect write messages for us. It doesn't remove the need for us to watch what it's doing. And so context management is going to head, in my opinion, in exactly the same way. Of course, it's going to be more automated. Of course, it's going to be faster. And of course, the labs are going to find ways to build better context engineering into the default behavior of the model. But it's never going to get to the point where we no longer have to worry about it.
100%.
Because that is going to be a recipe for
100%.
hell.
I feel like
humans still matter.
I feel like it's more important than ever for people to stop worrying about having to learn something new. Like this is going to happen, and more than ever, we need to be more involved in it, because if we don't, the technology is driven incorrectly. Just what Dan said, for example, they fundamentally improve these models to be better at these things based on how we use them. And if we are using them badly, they're going to maybe take longer to get better, or they're going to be fed bad information, which makes them, again, it makes it kind of like learn so that we can do better, so that it grows quicker, so that we can do less in the future and sit with a global universal income, do nothing, twiddle our thumbs and contemplate actual existence. It's important that people need to be okay with a shift. Dan's analogy was wonderful, because things, you have to guide it still.
The other reason why awareness of context will never go away is we have to realistically understand that the model only understands what it can understand. So if it asks me a question, do you prefer, in this instance, A or B, and my selection is A, it knows that I made that selection, but it has no idea my motivations or the decisions that happened in my head that led to that decision in that context. If you ask me that question in another context, sure, you may have memory that I made that decision in the past, and this could be therefore injected into context. But if I'm not aware of the fact that the model may completely misattribute that choice because I've made it in the past without any understanding of the context in which I made that decision, that can be super dangerous when it comes to things like fully hands-off agentic development. When I'm trusting an agent to go and build a product for me, or I'm trusting an agent to communicate with stakeholders or with customers, there will never be a point where a a model can understand what my decision will be in any context. It can understand what my decision would be in that exact same context.
Ta-da! Thank you both for explaining that to me. There is a lot to take in. It's actually mind-blowing because I think that I know a couple of cool things about AI, but I don't. I really feel like I don't. Except I know about context windows now. And I guess what that lets me know is that there is so much more. Go for it, Dan.
Oh, no.
Have you
All I was
frozen?
going to say is, unfortunately, that never ends. The more you think you know, the more you realize you just have no fucking idea. So, yeah, that's where we all are.
Yeah, but that's kind of what makes it so exciting, I guess. There's so much more going on behind the scenes than what I think. I can craft the most exceptional prompt. I can spend hours, which is what a lot of people actually do, crafting the most perfect prompt and thinking that the deeper I go into the conversation with my LLM, the better the conversation's going to become. And that is just not true because there is a context window and that context window runs out.
And I think if there is a key takeaway here, it's that what you may be attributing to buzzwords like hallucination or, oh, this model is a piece of crap, is actually you just exhausting the context window to the point where this thing is trying to pull an answer out of your entire life story. And I mean, can you do that? Probably not.
I guess the takeaway for me is definitely getting that summary and creating a fresh chat, starting again, and allowing the LLM to have the space to actually have that conversation with me. So that's been super useful. Thank you.
Amazing. Guys, fantastic to hang out with you, as always. Signing off. Thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye.